Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Thursday, July 31st. I'm Andrew Walworth. Joining me are Real Clear Politics President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, gentlemen, Kamala Harris announced yesterday that she would not run for governor in California. And today we learned she is, surprise, surprise, launching a podcast. No, she's writing a book. She's already written a book, I should say. It's called 107 Days. That's the length of her campaign. She promises a behind-the-scenes account of her journey. And Tom, here's a little bit of her introducing the book.
In writing this book, one truth kept coming back to me. Sometimes the fight takes a while, but I remain full of hope, and I remain clear-eyed. I will never stop fighting to make our country reflect the very best of its ideals, always on behalf of the people. So thank you for being in this fight with me. I am forever grateful, and I cannot wait for you to read this, and I'll see you out there.
So the fight continues. She'll see you out there. Is she showing some ankle for a presidential run?
Well, she certainly did not rule out run in 2028. But as far as the book goes, you know, I'm curious as to how many Democrats are going to pay the $25 or $30 to relive that traumatic campaign, the 107 days. This was I know some Democrats thought she ran a flawless campaign and she did everything right. You know, Sonny Hostin at The View and all these folks thought that she was just fabulous. So maybe they'll buy the book and enjoy it. But I think for a lot of Democrats, her campaign left some things to be desired. They spent $1.5 billion trying to get her across the finish line. She ended up losing all 7 swing states. And so I'm just not sure. I'll be interested to see if there's any news made by this book, if there's any real revelations of any consequence that come out of it. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. I definitely think she's still thinking about 2028. You look at these polls, she remains just based on pure name ID that she's at the top of the list or near the top of the list. And so I think she has options to run for 2028. I don't know if she'd be successful. We've talked about her previous campaigns. She hasn't done particularly well, not even in the Democratic primary, but I think she's still looking at it.
Yeah. Well, Carl, she's 60 years old, which is a spring chicken by Washington standards these days. So, and my guess is that if she did run again, she'd run a very different campaign than she did this last time around. What do you make of the book and her decision not to run in California?
Among the Democrats who think she ran a flawless campaign, who Tom mentioned, is not Luis Vizcaíno, who was a spokesman for her for many years. He's also been a spokesman for Antonio Villaraigosa, who was the former mayor of LA, and Katie Porter. Coincidentally, two people who now are going to probably throw their hat in the ring for governor. But here's what Luis told the Los Angeles Times. He said Kamala Harris' decision, quote, is a strategic retreat for a candidate still reeling from a $1 billion presidential loss. She is the walking wounded, and this move clearly signals her need to reestablish her brand. It's a massive relief for Democratic Party leaders and donors across California who, despite their loyalty, have lost confidence in her. So that, if she's thinking any of those things, here's the guy who was close to her, if he's thinking that, it sounds like she's taking the time to recoup, to write the book, to let the Trump administration play out. She hinted she's taking some other role. She said, my leadership is not going to be elective politics. I don't know what she's going to do, but she's going to do something. And I think she has to sort of retrench and start over. There is, of course, a precedent here in California. It's a long time ago, but Richard Nixon came out here after he lost a close race in 1960. This was a close race last year, despite Trump keeps saying it was a landslide. It was a very close race. And he came out here. He actually ran for governor, lost. I think, Kamala Harris certainly knows that story. And I think but then he spent the next time campaigning for other Republicans, rebuilding his brand. Then he ran, of course, and won in 68. So I don't think we've heard the last of her.
Tom, Well, let's talk about some other polls then for a second, because we have this Gallup poll, which came out. It has some good news for Democrats. According to Gallup, Democrats have regained the advantage when it comes to party affiliation. That is, more Americans consider themselves Democrats than Republicans for the first time in over a year. 46% are either Democrats or Democratic leaning, 43% Republicans, or they lean to the GOP. But, this same poll and other polls, including the Wall Street Journal, show that Americans, their favorable rating of the Democratic Party is at the lowest since 1992. Only 34% have a favorable view of the party. Some of that has to sort of, go into her thinking, right? I mean, she's kind of responsible as much as anybody for the hole that the Democrats are in.
Yes and no. I mean, I think part of what frustrates Democrats or frustrated them about that last election was there was no primary, and it was just the baton was passed straight to her. So it was sort of undemocratic in that sense. And that wasn't necessarily her fault. I think she probably advocated for it. I don't think she wanted to face other Democrats to be the nominee of the party. And look, a lot of that is also has to do with some of the issues that Democrats find themselves on the wrong side of. But, and I talked to Sean Trendy a little bit about this yesterday, about how Democrats could be seen so unfavorably across the board, but yet be leading in the generic congressional ballot, right? That question that pollsters ask, if the election were held today, would you vote for Republicans or Democrats? Well, Democrats are leading in our average by about almost 3 points. I think the Gallup numbers sort of confirm that, and it's true historically that, some of these folks that when someone a party gets elected, that you'll find some retrenchment, some folks who will say, well, they go from being Republicans to independents, right? And some of the people who are independents are now back to leaning Democrats. They were originally Democrats, right? But they call themselves independents for the purposes of self-identification, but are now sort of, reverting back to their structural DNA, if you will. And so I think part of this isn't unusual because the Trump administration has, they've been pretty aggressive on some of their policy fronts.
On everything.
Well, yeah. And some of that stuff has been popular and some of it hasn't been as popular, especially, execution wise. So look, I don't know how much we'll be able to read into this in terms of what it means for the respective parties. Maybe the Democrats aren't in that bad of trouble at all. And maybe their nominee is can be as left-wing as they want and be perfectly fine running in 2028. But maybe not. Maybe Democrats do need to learn some lessons and do need to tack to the middle on some of these issues to win back the confidence of centrists and independents and sort of moderate Democrats. We're a long way from knowing the answers to those questions, though.
It does seem like there are these two different stories, right? We have this sort of decline in general view of the Democratic Party, but as Tom points out, these other numbers, the generic congressional race, the party ID, are sort of trending towards the Democrats. So what's going on?
Well, part of the problem is it's a bipolar world and in American politics. And I mean that both literally and as a pun. Most Americans on any given issue are in the middle between these two great proud parties, who the Republicans have careened to the populist right, the Democrats have careened to the woke left, and so given a choice, Americans have to choose. I think you'd have a plurality of people who would take a common sense centrist if everything else being equal. But the other thing is, and political science I know, and social scientists I know, and political practitioners I know, they all tell me I'm full of crap on this, but I think Americans, the compromise Americans make is they go for divided government. I think so. You got Trump in the White House, you got the the Republicans controlling the Senate. I think there's a critical mass of voters, even if it's only 5%, but in close elections, it matters. We say, okay, let's have some check and balance. Let's have the House be Democrat. So I think that's part of what's going on in the generic ballot.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, I got to ask you about this other poll. It's from folks at Emerson College Polling. They tested J.D. Vance against what they say are the three top possible Democratic contenders, Gavin Newsom, AOC, and Pete Buttigieg. they do not consider the former vice president one of the top contenders. Found out that Vance, according to their numbers, could beat them all. That must make some people around at least the vice president happy, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, barely. I mean, he beats AOC by like 2.3 points or something. And I think Pete Buttigieg was the one who ran best against Vance. Vance beat him by 1 point. I mean, I think the takeaway from those polls was that it's going to be close, and that there are about 4 or 5 times as many people undecided, anywhere from 12 to 14%, who say, now, contrary to what Carl just said, that means about 85% of the public is already locked into their choices. Maybe not. You still got to run a campaign, but there definitely is a red team, blue team aspect to this. But I think it does. Look, JD Vance, remember when he was chosen, people were questioning that choice. He does have the pole position and to be the inheritor. Now, does that mean he's not going to face a challenge? No, I think he might face a challenge from a couple of folks in the Republican Party for that nomination. But yeah, at least right now, Democrats look like they could be competitive. And that's just a virtue of the fact we have a pretty evenly divided country, and we're talking about all the same 7 swing states, and Carl and I will get to bet another bottle of wine on that and how that's going to turn out. I can't wait, Cannon.
Guy wins one bet in 10 years. He's crowing.
It was a good bottle of wine, by the way. Excellent choice.
But Carl, well, what do you make of Stuart's poll?
Well, it's largely name ID at this point as well. My gut feeling tells me Pete Buttigieg is not the strongest national candidate. He ran much better than expected in the primaries when he did run. He's depending on your point of view, glib or articulate. He's well spoken. He's obviously intelligent. He's got an interesting life story, but I don't think he'll end up being the nominee. I mean, he's not done the kinds of things in life that you get the major party nomination until Donald Trump came along. Let me add, that's a big caveat. I understand, but that's my caveat. I mean, I think it'll, probably be a governor or a senator, or if some superstar comes in, a Tom Hanks type person, who knows?
Tom Hanks.
But he was Pete Buttigieg. The Democrat base likes him, but he was the mayor of a small city in the Midwest, and he was a minor cabinet official of no particular distinction. That not usually enough to become the national candidate. The most intriguing name on that list to me is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I mean, she'll barely be old enough to run for president. She's never run for any office outside that small district that she won through a surprise attack on a Democratic incumbent. She had when she started in the House, she had a series of kind of dumb remarks, and she filled up Republican Twitter. But if you've been paying close attention, she's learned on the job. Her learning curve's been impressive. She comes across as thoughtful. She's very progressive. When somebody lobs a hand grenade from her left, she rushes that thing before sticks the pin back in, or whatever the metaphor, and throws it right back at him. She's got some toughness. She's an intriguing candidate to me. But in the end, it'd probably be a governor, and it'd probably be JD Vance. And the question will be, What governor, Carl?
You're dying to speak his name, Carl.
I don't know if he pronounces it Bashir or Bashir. I think he's from Kentucky. I'm in California this week, so if you're just listening to our show for maybe the first time, my friends are needling me about my Gavin Newsom fixation. but I would look in all seriousness. I would, my guess would be, and the conventional wisdom sometimes wrong, but it's usually right. We all want to have a fresh take, but guess what? Babe Ruth really was a great baseball player, probably the best. And so usually conventional wisdom's right. And you look at the Democrats have 3 candidates. Governors have been successful. Gavin Newsom's one, Gretchen Whitman's another, and Andy Bashir, who's won in a Republican state. Tom used the phrase pole position. Those to me would be the sort of most obvious candidates at this point. But you can't. Trump has taught us you can't rule out the unexpected.
Guys, we got to talk about tariffs. It's kind of a confused picture. Trump announced today that he was extending the deadline for Mexico for 90 days. He talked to the Mexican president this morning. I guess that phone call went well. He's not so happy with Canada or Brazil. We also have these oral arguments started today in a court case that's going to challenge Trump's authority to impose tariffs across the board. Tom, what's going on, and what should we take away from today's news?
Well, I mean, the court case is interesting and potentially important, right? It's being challenged. Trump's authority. They've executed these tariffs by using this sort of obscure law that has never been used before to justify these sort of extreme circumstances that would allow the president of the United States to use his authority for tariffs. Otherwise, he would not have that power. And so that's how they've been justifying all of the tariff stuff that's been happening so far. And so Pam Bondi, the Justice Department, is in court defending that and saying that part of their argument, by the way, is because all of these negotiations are ongoing, it would be a total national security disaster to pull the plug on these tariffs right now. So they've kind of, it's one of those situations where because it's already started, they can't stop it. And if they did stop it, it would have adverse consequences. So we'll see what happens. But clearly, Trump has, he just did a deal with, made some news on India, slapped a tariff on them and a penalty for trading with China. He announced South Korea, 15% tariff on South Korea today. So there's a lot of activity that's going on. But you can, as you mentioned, with Brazil, it seems to be almost personal, and certainly with Canada and the Canadian leader who said that they were going to, recognize a Palestinian state, and it's kind of personal with Canada too. So it seems like Trump is using tariffs for I don't want to say personal reasons, but definitely for behavior modification and wanting to sort of impose his will on these countries by use of this tool in his toolbox.
Tariffs, warfare by another means.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, this is what he said on Truth Social this morning about Canada, Carl. He said, Canada has just announced that it is backing statehood for Palestine. That will make it very hard for us to make a trade deal with them. Oh, Canada.
Oh, Canada.
Right? I mean, this is really using tariffs for a whole range of either personal or foreign policy objectives. Right?
Well, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't use tariffs to affect good behavior on other nations. That's what trade sanctions are all about. I mean, trade sanctions are the most extreme form of tariffs. So Trump's not in uncharted water there, but this court case is interesting because some states in the United States object to the tariffs, and the president's authority seems to it's pretty tenuous. So, but what Tom and I were struck by the same thing. Pam Bondi's argument. It's kind of like, maybe because I'm in California this week, I was thinking, okay, the National Forest Service has started backfires to prevent wildfires from consuming national parks. And then the Sierra Club goes to court and says they don't have the authority to do that. They didn't get the right permits. And then the National Park Service says, yeah, but we already started the fires. And if you don't let us continue now, it'll be Armageddon. That's kind of what the Pam Bondi's argument. It's a practical, not a legal argument. But but those kind of arguments, sometimes, judges listen to them.
Tom, what happens next with Mexico? I mean, they've extended this for 90 days. This is a sort of taco Trump, I guess, is what they call it. What is it? Trump always chickens out.
That's the best use of that I've ever heard, Andy.
Yeah. But it just makes it hard, I think. I'm thinking of the Federal Reserve, but I'm also thinking about everyone. How do you plan in a world where these tariffs are, on one day, then off one day? I mean, just yesterday, he said, no, Friday is the day. And then, today, another 90 days.
Yeah. And look, we all know people who have businesses and probably talk to them from time to time. And I have a good friend who runs a very large company, and it's a problem. It's a problem when you don't know what the government, in the short term, when you don't know what the government's going to be doing day to day, but also to your point, Andy, when you're looking to try and plan out in the next year, 5 years, 10 years for your business, especially when we're talking about, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of investments that need to be made. This is not small potatoes stuff. And the administration has been, while I think they've been winning on this issue, and we've seen how, none of, we talked about this the other day, none of the apocalyptic predictions have come true about what tariffs, at least thus far, about what tariffs would do to the economy and all that stuff.
At least thus far, yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, it hasn't made it easy on business people, and Wall Street loves sort of certainty and despises chaos. They've learned to live with a certain amount of chaos with Trump, but yeah, it could be better for business people if Trump wasn't changing his tune from day to day and carving out exemptions here and extending deadlines here and doing all the things that he's done. That's just the way he operates, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily, good for business overall.
Yeah. Well, final topic for this segment, and that is that the House has gone home, as we know, but the Senate is still in session. And the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee yesterday sent what is called the Honest Act to the floor. It was an 8-7 decision with Senator Josh Hawley, the Republican, voting with the Democrats to get it out of committee. The bill basically bans members of Congress and their spouses, as well as the president and the vice president, from trading stocks while in office. Carl, White House was not too pleased with this, but Nancy Pelosi says she likes it now, and I guess Trump's coming around on this. Is this going to be the new norm?
Well, it's kind of aimed at Pelosi, so she's suing for peace, I guess. But, I think this is, well, certainly, look, these members of Congress, the idea is that they're privy to decisions, not insider information so much, but that they can cast votes that help or hurt their own portfolios. That's the concern. Mm-hmm. I think it's a solution in search of a problem, personally. But I arrive at that position because I remember how the shabby and really unconscionable way Kelly Loeffler was treated by the media, more than the Democrats. It turned out she had done not only no insider trading whatsoever. If you Google her to this day, that's what'll pop up. But she had more rigorous controls to avoid insider trading than any member of Senate that ever lived because of her husband's business. And so I'm pretty jaded about this. I think it's just a grandstanding issue. That said, if you're going into public service, I certainly see no harm in a requirement that you put your holdings in a blind trust and you get a fiduciary to manage it, which, by the way, is what Kelly Loeffler had. And, and it can be mutual funds, it can be stocks, it can be anything you want, but you won't have knowledge, even secondary or tertiary knowledge that you might. I think it would save these people, from this headache of being accused of this. But I don't really see that there's much corruption. That's not the kind of corruption that's really the problem in this country. Mm-hmm. But I don't see the harm of it either.
Tom, what do you think of it?
I don't know why this isn't already the law, and I don't know why Congress wouldn't want to do this to restore trust in the institution. Right? If you believe Congress, if you want to see it succeed and you want to restore trust, this should be a no-brainer. Individual, members of Congress should not be able to trade individual stocks. And you may think that's unfair, but look, certain jobs come with certain restrictions, right? And that's just sort of the way it is. And so I don't know. I don't know why this is what was an 8-7 decision and why Josh Hawley's, siding with the Democrats here. I mean, Republicans should have written this bill and passed it years ago. And the fact that they haven't already done that and that it's not the law of the land, kind of baffles me. It should be.
Yeah. Well, Rick Scott, who is one of the wealthier members of Congress, he said this. He says, "I don't know when in this country it became a negative to make money." So, there's one guy who.
But that's not what it is. That's not what this is about. Nobody's saying that you can't make money. They're saying you shouldn't be able to trade individual stocks when you're in a position as an elected official. Again, if we want to restore confidence and trust in these institutions, this is an easy way of doing that.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we're going to have to take a break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking with Tom and Carl, but don't go away. We'll be back with more right after these words.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined now by Austin Berg. He's the executive director of the Chicago Policy Center and the author of The New Chicago Way. Austin, good to have you back on the show.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
So what's our mayor up to these days? Just checking in. I know we get a little parochial here on the show. I know it's a national show, but I like to focus on Chicago every now and then because there's a lot happening. And obviously I am based here. And so I follow this stuff closer than most. But I also think, Austin, you know, we're talking about what's going on with Mamdani in New York. We're talking about, you know, we spent a lot of time during the fires talking about Karen Bass in Los Angeles. So good to check in on what's going on in one of the major American cities and being run by Brandon Johnson, who's obviously a very progressive guy. And he's now proposing, he gave a press conference the other day, said basically everything's on the table with regard to the budget, including the idea of a head tax. Explain sort of what our situation is here and what the mayor is opening the door to.
Several things going on here. So Chicago exploded its spending over the COVID era. The budget went up by about 40%. And yet the city is still facing $1 billion deficit going into next year. Many people think, oh, well, the only way to close this is via a property tax hike. Brandon Johnson promised over and over again he was not going to hike property taxes during his campaign. His CFO came out last week and told Bloomberg, hey, yeah, property taxes are likely. And then Brandon Johnson came out and said, no, it's not going to be part of my proposal. So then he had this press conference and people were like, well, what is?
And just as a reminder, he tried proposing a property tax increase, right? And it was completely.
He already, it's mayhem and from a communications perspective, because yes, he proposed last year a $300 million property tax hike. And that spurred the only ever 50-0 city council vote against a sitting mayor. That has never happened in the history of Chicago. It happened on Brandon Johnson's property tax. So somehow
he revised it down to like 162 million, and that didn't fly. And then he revised it down to 0. It was like, okay, we finally got the idea. But anyway,
yes, it ratcheted down. He lost about 4 other smaller property tax hikes until it finally went to 0, and he gave up. So somehow his chief financial officer was not on the same page about this, and he floated this as a possibility, and he had to then come out and walk it back. So now people are asking, well, what are you going to do? You know, Chicago's already on a negative credit rating. We have the worst credit rating of any big city in the country. Puerto Rico is really the only place in the U.S. that's worse from a municipal government standpoint in terms of its credit rating.
So hard to believe.
So and here's the thing: he will not say that cuts are on the board. He will not discuss furloughs. He will not discuss cuts. So the only thing that is on the table, and that's what you're referring to, are just these various revenue schemes. And you can say a lot, you know, at the federal level, you want to tweak tax policy to like tax the rich more. Okay, have that debate. When we're talking about cities that are highly competitive, the capital is highly mobile, these kinds of proposals don't work well. They will be lost leaders. And he mentioned one, the corporate head tax, which Chicago did have. It actually repealed it in 2014, I believe. But this is a per job tax. So if you're a corporation in Chicago, you get taxed based on how many people you hire, which is, you know, anyone listening knows why that's a bad idea.
It is. Where did this? I'm going to have to go back and do some research on where the head tax came from, because it's such a, obviously, as you say, catastrophically bad idea that would just kill growth, kill jobs. And as you mentioned, one of the things about, you know, especially post-COVID with, you know, people being able to work remotely, you know, we've seen a lot of movement of corporations flight out of blue cities, blue states into red cities, red states. It would think, including from here, by the way, that politicians would try something different, but it seems like that's not the case. So is this going to go anywhere? I mean, there were some other, I guess, tax schemes that were proposed, none of which seem any better, but what are the other options that are quote unquote on the table?
Yeah, there was some talk of basically what amounts to a payroll tax. Seattle did this, where it's essentially folks making over a certain amount, the corporation is taxed on a chunk of their payroll. It's almost like a city income tax. And there are many reasons why people think that would be unconstitutional in Illinois. We have a flat tax protection in our constitution in this state, which is one of the only kind of pro-taxpayer protections that we have. J.B. Pritzker spent more than $50 million on a campaign to try to repeal that in 2020, and voters rejected it. So I don't think that's going anywhere. I do think it's important, though, to note, even if these tax hikes don't go anywhere, it's harmful to the city's image and its ability to attract capital when when these things are even tossed out, and especially when they're tossed out without a fully baked plan for how this is going to actually solve the city's problems. Instead, it's just this sort of one-way ratchet on the revenue side, and that it's very hard to attract businesses that way. And when asked about this, Brandon Johnson, there was a very pointed question to Johnson at this press conference saying, well, what about those people who call this tax a jobs killer? And he said, well, when businesses talk to me, when corporate leaders talk to me, they only talk about public safety. They don't talk about job killers. And that is just absurd. He has not had experience in the private sector. And the idea that private industry is not talking about the tax burden of big cities, about the debt burden, which then turns into taxes of big cities, that's absurd. So the final thing I'll note on that too, Tom, is Chicago is different than many other big blue union-dominated cities in that we don't have voter approval for tax hikes and for new debt. That is a very common accountability mechanism in cities across the country. And I would encourage folks on the Chicago City Council to make that any part of any deal that you're going to have to put your name on a tax hike for Brandon Johnson's tax hike. That better be a voter approval. That should be a democratic process. And that's a good accountability mechanism when you have that in place.
Brandon Johnson, you mentioned this question about all these business leaders that he's been supposedly talking to. And he's got this advisory board that's supposed to meet and come up with recommendations for how to fill this budget gap. But he sort of was front running them at this press conference, right? He sort of put all this stuff out, which is, as you mentioned, not something that, you would traditionally do if you were looking for people to give you sort of unvarnished advice behind closed doors. You'd probably try and want to wait and get their proposals. But be that as it may, I mean, if you were on his advisory board, if you had his ear, I mean, what are the solutions? What can be done? You mentioned that, spending now, and I think this is true at the federal level too, it's like 50% more than it was pre-COVID. I mean, we just absolutely flooded the system. And those dollars just, instead of, paying down debt or getting put into a rainy day fund, they just got spent. Now they're gone. And the problem still exists. So what would you recommend? How can Chicago work its way out of the fiscal hole that it's in?
The number one thing to do when you are digging a hole fiscally is to stop digging. And that requires Brandon Johnson to just simply say publicly that a current bill in Springfield, it's a pension sweetener bill for Chicago pensions. It's on Governor J.B. Pritzker's desk right now. This bill increases pension benefits for some police employees and some fire employees in the city of Chicago. We have the worst pension debt of any city in the country. We have 7 of the 10 worst funded pensions in the country are in Chicago, and this bill would make it worse. So you got to tell Pritzker.
Is JB going to sign that?
I don't think he will. I think I shouldn't say I don't think he will. I should say I've been encouraged by Pritzker's public comments saying, raising questions about it. And his main question about it has been, how is Chicago going to pay for this? And that's the right question. This bill, this pension sweetener, costs the city $60 million next year. It costs the city $750 million a year by 2055. It's a ramp. And this is the nature of these defined benefit pensions. They're fiscally insane. It makes the retirement security of our first responders, police and fire, it makes their retirements less secure. It takes them from 25% funded, which is a joke, worst in the country, to 18% funded. So you're talking about these things just going insolvent, really, at that point. And how is that pro-police or pro-fire to do that? So that's the first thing Brandon Johnson needs to do is say, hey, Springfield, stop digging. We cannot afford this right now. That's what I would suggest he do.
But that isn't going to, I mean, that might get us a little bit of the way there. We've got about a minute left. I mean, what else can be done? I mean, are there jobs that can be cut, spending can be, I mean,
absolutely. So there
think
needs
Doge city government.
labor needs to be brought to the table, and labor needs to be told Chicagoans are tapped out on tax hikes. We need skin in the game from government worker unions. That could be in furlough days. It may require layoffs, but we're talking here about returning to 2019 spending levels. We're not talking about becoming like a third world, country backwater that has no public services. We are going back to the, medieval days of 2019, that city
Right.
services, which is, that is tough. I'm not saying that there aren't sacrifices that need to be made, but it's also that when you increase taxes and fees on the existing Chicago businesses, you start a death spiral. And you could even, as part of that, discuss some ways to enhance revenue, but it has to be a picture that's done together. And it also needs to come with those accountability mechanisms I talked about, like voter approval of tax hikes and new debt. You need an independent budget office and city council. You need some structural reforms to earn the trust of Chicagoans to go along with any kind of tax hike that's being discussed.
All right. We will leave it there. Austin Berg, Executive Director, Chicago Policy Center, author of The New Chicago Way. Austin, always great to have you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Tom.
All right. Going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by presidential historian Tevi Troy. He is the author of The Power and the Money, The Epic Clashes Between Commanders-in-Chief and Titans of Industry, as well as several other books. Tevi, welcome back to the program.
Thanks. It's always great to be with you, Andy.
So, Tevi, Joe Biden has sold his presidential memoir to a publisher for an advance of $10 million. And you have a prediction about it that you published in the Wall Street Journal. It's kind of a preview as opposed to a review. But what do you expect to find out, if anything, in this new autobiography?
Yeah, a friend of mine joked that I'm one of the rare people who reviewed the book before it even came out. But I think it's going to be boring. I just don't think he's going to say anything. I've looked at the history of presidential memoirs, and there are a number of pitfalls that presidents have fallen into. And I think he's likely to fall into all of them. Likely use of a ghostwriter without him heavily being involved in the process, just given his lack of acuity. I think he's going to try and overpraise his aides, the Politburo of people who protected him from the media and from the public, and instead of actually going into the details about how they were misleading the American public. I think he's going to be trying to act in a lot of self-justification. So I just don't think he's really going to tell the inside story that people want to hear.
Yeah,
I mean, want to hear it from him.
Right. But I mean, that sort of fits the pattern because you lay out in your in the piece, it was in the Wall Street Journal. Most of these presidential memoirs are not very good, I guess, to put it mildly.
I will say that the great memoir by an ex-president about his time as president has not yet been written. Mm-hmm. The reason I say about his time as president is because Ulysses S. Grant wrote one mostly about his time in the military, and that is more interesting. And it was I don't want to say co-written, but with Mark Twain, but Mark Twain helped him with it. So I think that one gets high marks. But other than that, they're pretty mediocre.
Yeah. The Grant book is the one that people point to as sort of the great, the sort of great memoir written by maybe not so great a president. But the $10 million sounds to me like a lot of money. But I looked at other presidents, and the Obamas got, I think, $60 million for their memoir. And Bill Clinton, I think he wrote My Life, and I think he got about $16 million for that. So, and that was in 2004 dollars or whatever. So the $10 million isn't really that much money as these things go.
Well, I would love to get a $10 million advance for one of my books about presidential history. $10 million is a disappointment for an ex-president writing a memoir. You're totally correct. And the $66 million Obama deal, as outrageous as it sounded, was actually a pretty good deal for the Michelle Obama's memoir Becoming is the best-selling autobiography of all time. So I think some of these books can sell if you're willing to show a little leg, as it were. But I don't think Biden's got the capacity to do it, and I'm not sure I want to see Biden's leg at this point.
It's I'm wondering about what he can say. I mean, do you get the feeling that like none of these presidents can really be honest in these books because, there's just too much at stake. You talked about LBJ and how he would, well, I'll let you tell the story, but he was known for his colorful language, but he didn't want to see any of it in his book, right?
Yeah, LBJ would tell these great stories to his writers, and then they'd put it down on the page, and he'd get all upset and yell at them for saying, "I'm supposed to be a statesman. I can't put this down." But look, Joe Biden is not running for president again. His political career is over. His kids aren't running for president. I mean, I think he should just say, "I'm going to let it all out," and talk honestly about why he thought he could run for president when he clearly didn't have the capacity. Did he recognize that he didn't have the capacity? What went on in meetings with world leaders? What happened when he forgot that El-Sisi was the president of Egypt and not of Mexico? I mean, I think that would be interesting. I'd want to know that. Also, Trump wrote him a letter before Biden took office that was supposedly very gracious, and Biden has never revealed the contents. What are the contents of that letter? So there are things he could say that I'd want to read, but I think he's unlikely to do it.
Yeah. So about some other presidential memoirs, though. I mean, Reagan wrote his book. It was called An American Life. Got pretty tepid reviews, I guess. So, like I say, I mean, he's kind of joining a club. I mean, I get your point that it's not going to be very interesting, but isn't that sort of a dog bites man story when it comes to these presidential memoirs?
Well, it isn't. It isn't. I mean, the Reagan memoir in particularly was dull because Reagan was very disassociated from the process. He even joked after it came out, maybe someday I'll read it. So, I mean, he had a hands-off approach. But Bill Clinton, there's some interesting stuff in Bill Clinton's memoir. But the problem with Clinton's memoir is that there's just too much of it. It goes on for 1,000 pages. He wanted to have 2 volumes, and the publisher said, no, you have to get it in 1. So they had to get it under 1,000 pages. The joke about the book, I think it was from David Letterman, was even his book is fat. So I think there was stuff in his memoir that was interesting, but just too much of it. So I think a president can do something good. Eisenhower modeled his memoirs on Grant, and there's some good stuff in there. It's possible. It's just hard.
Yeah. You mentioned his kids. Of course, Hunter Biden is a published author as well. And I was surprised to know his book got to be number 4 on the New York Times bestseller list. And that was before the trial. And then it sort of got a second life during the trial because they were reaching into the book to use stuff, against him in the trial, I guess. So Hunter's written 1 book, I guess. He said he's going to write another. And this is actually Joe Biden's 3rd book, right? I mean, he's written 2 other sort of earlier memoirs. So this one is supposed to just cover his presidency, though, I guess that's the difference.
Yeah, and a presidency is clearly eventful enough that you can write a whole book on it. In terms of Hunter, look, people like to see a meltdown. And if you saw his recent podcast interviews, that's what he did. So maybe Hunter Biden will sell a memoir of just F-bombs or something like that. And maybe people will buy it. You never know what someone's going to buy.
What about Trump? Trump did not write a memoir when he left office, but I guess that will be a book people will be interested in. Depending on how he does with publishers, I would think he'd get a pretty big advance for his book when he's finished this time around.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough question because on the one hand, he could write an interesting book and he's obviously a colorful figure and he can sell stuff. On the other hand, the people who make these decisions are in the New York publishing world, and they tend not to give as big advances to Republicans as they do to Democrats, and especially to Trump, who's particularly hated in that world. So I don't know what the Trump memoir would be. Also, given Trump's tendencies, he might want to create his own publishing house and self-publish it. He did write a book about pictures from his administration where he had some kind of sharp comments about people, including Mark Zuckerberg, who he talked about. He showed a picture of a dinner with Zuckerberg coming to visit him, and he says that Zuckerberg was coming to kiss up to him. He used saltier language that I'm willing to use on the radio. So Trump did that. He also published letters that he had with celebrities. I mean, Trump's been a headline guy for 40, 50 years already. So there's definitely a lot of material for him, and he knows how to attract attention. So I think a Trump memoir would not be dull.
All right. Well, Tevi, we're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking with presidential historian Tevi Troy, and that's our program for today. We'll be back here tomorrow. Have a great evening.